Qatar hosts the single largest US military installation in the Middle East. Qatar also hosts the political leadership of the US-designated word-I-can't-say organization, Hamas. Qatar plays the role of mediator in negotiations between Israel and Hamas, while also fueling hostility throughout the Middle East by giving radical groups a media platform through Al Jazeera. This tiny Gulf nation works closely with US diplomats and pours money into Islamist factions. Qatar has wired billions into Gaza and US Ivy League universities and even US public schools. So why is Qatar spending money on Hamas and the US? To understand Qatar's global strategy, we need to back it up. In the mid-1800s, the capital of Qatar, Doha, was a poor fishing village. Its main industry? Pearls, often harvested by enslaved workers taken from East Africa. But there was trouble brewing. Two warring clans, the Al-Thani clan and their rivals, the Al-Khalifas, based next door in Bahrain. So the Al-Thanis struck a deal with the British Empire, offering loyalty in exchange for protection from Bahrain. The British wanted to secure their empire and maritime routes around India. The Al-Thanis wanted to stay in power. Enter the Emirate of Qatar. Not a British colony, not an independent country, but something in between called a British protectorate. The Al-Thanis ran things domestically while the British handled foreign policy and defense. The British had the same setup with Bahrain, Kuwait, and what we today know as the UAE. Great, so Britain has effective control over a critical waterway, and the Al-Thanis have their pearls, enslaved Africans, and no more wars with Bahrain. But then, nearly overnight, everything changed.
Black gold.
Yep, first came the discovery of oil in the peninsula, then the world's largest natural gas field. Suddenly, this backwater was sitting on a fortune.
Made you rich.
British and later American energy companies set up shop, and the Al-Thani family grew wildly rich. The downside? The British pressured them to outlaw enslaving Africans. I know, bummer, right? But don't worry, because they really only just rebranded it under a new system where migrant workers were tied to employers with few legal protections. Billions of dollars in oil money, and yet they still needed enslaved people? But I digress. Qatar finally gained full independence in 1971. Woohoo! Bust out the fireworks and hot dogs. Except the tiny country basically had no army. Uh-oh. And then came the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and suddenly these tiny, oil-rich countries looked exposed. The US stepped in to stop Saddam, and Qatar let US forces launch operations from its territory. And just like that, the role the British had played for a century fell into the lap of the United States. And it looked like a pretty good deal, except for one problem: the leader of Qatar. Emir Khalifa didn't want trouble. He didn't want international tensions. He just wanted to rake in the cash and stay a quiet protectorate of Saudi Arabia. See, sandwiched between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Qatar had money but no power. And Emir Khalifa? He was pretty much okay with that. But Emir Khalifa's son, Hamad, had a very different vision. Qatar as a regional and global powerhouse. So, in 1995, Hamad led a bloodless coup against his own father and seized power. Emir Hamad diversified the country's investments beyond oil and poured money into education and infrastructure. He shut down Qatar's quiet Ministry of Information and replaced it with Al Jazeera. And he built a massive military base to host US forces increasingly occupied in the region with wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And of course, housing the largest US military base in the region gave Qatar a massive security guarantee against any of its neighbors trying any funny business. Yup, under new leadership, things were looking pretty good for Qatar. The country was expanding its influence, but it was doing it on its own terms, cozying up to Western power while championing Islamic causes abroad. See, Qatar is rooted in Wahabi Islam, a theology that firmly believes Muslim lands should be ruled by Islamic law. That worldview helped shape Qatar's role as a patron of Islamist movements across the region, and set it on a collision course with its neighbors. And I'm not just talking about Israel. While other Arab states expelled the Muslim Brotherhood, Qatar welcomed them. It funded their scholars, gave them a megaphone through Al Jazeera, and aligned itself with their vision of a pan-Islamic order. The Taliban got similar treatment, a political office, global access, and just enough legitimacy to negotiate with the West. Hamas? They're headquartered in Qatar too. Their leadership lives in luxury, far from Gaza. On October 7th, while Hamas fighters raided Israeli border communities, Hamas leaders were watching on their big screen TVs from Qatar. Qatar also maintains close ties with Iran and Turkey, two rising Islamic powers with global ambitions. And pretty much all of Qatar's new friends have another thing in common. They hate the Saudis. So in 2017, Saudi Arabia and its allies cut ties with Qatar, accused it of supporting extremist factions and threatening their national security. The Saudi-led group imposed a sweeping embargo. Qatar was suddenly isolated and vulnerable. The US had to step in to de-escalate. Qatar survived, but the tension triggered some serious Gulf War PTSD. And once again, it was the US that saved the day. So Qatar began expanding its efforts to buy influence abroad, pouring billions into winning friends in the West. Qatar's government has invested nearly $100 billion in the US alone. It funds universities, including a Georgetown campus in Doha, and bankrolls major think tanks that help shape US policy. It spent millions on lobbying efforts in Washington, ensuring its voice is heard in the halls of power. And it's bipartisan. Qatar has hired journalists and political consultants from across the American political spectrum. But Qatar's biggest US investment isn't in DC. It's in Qatar. The Al Udeid Air Base, the forward headquarters of US Central Command, built and now getting upgraded at a cost of $8 billion by the Qatari government. Qatar's influence campaign hasn't just worked, it's flourished. In 2022, the world turned its eyes to Doha as Qatar hosted the FIFA World Cup. The tournament was a global spectacle, and for Qatar, a coming out party. Yeah, of sorts. Lavish stadiums, spotless streets, and the prestige of hosting Messi's dramatic final win. It wasn't just a sports event. It was proof that money and influence can rewrite a country's image. And Qatar's investments in the US seem to be paying off. Back in 2017, Senator Lindsey Graham took a hard line on Qatar. But after Qatar Airways invested billions into his home state, his tone changed. Across both parties, lawmakers echo Qatar-friendly positions, many backed by Qatar-linked funding. And it's not just politicians. The founder of right-leaning Newsmax reportedly encouraged staff to soften coverage of Qatar. Meanwhile, an MSNBC host appeared at a friendly conference in Doha. And then there's the big guy himself. In his first term, Trump called Qatar
a funder of terrorism.
But more recently, Trump praised the Emir of Qatar as a vital partner.
This is an outstanding man. He's a great man, and we're going to help each other.
And let's face it, he was right both times. Qatar's soft power playbook mixes petrodollars for international influence and political Islam for street cred. And the engine of that street cred is Al Jazeera. By way of example, here's one of the spiritual leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood on Al Jazeera, saying claims of what Germany did in the Shoah are exaggerated, but even so, it was divine punishment for the Jews. He closes things off by saying that he hopes to one day make it to the land of jihad, where remember, this isn't 4chan, this isn't Iran, this is the media arm of US ally Qatar, and things haven't improved over the years. After October 7th, Al Jazeera aired a documentary from inside Hamas, showing leaders selecting targets in Israel. Oh, and claiming that on October 7th,
فوجدنا بعض العائلات والأطفال فقمنا بتأمينهم والمحافظة عليهم.
This is a critical US ally pumping out Hamas propaganda. Is this how we're going to get to peace in the Middle East? And Qatar isn't just limited to media spin on behalf of Hamas. They've sent $1.8 billion to Hamas over the years, including $30 million every month in the years leading up to October 7th. And as we already covered, for more than a decade, Qatar has hosted Hamas's political leadership, providing them with a luxury home base far from the battlefield. But let's be clear, Israel and the US had given approval to these arrangements. They'd hoped Qatari cash would ensure Hamas wouldn't trigger a regional meltdown by acting on its rhetoric of seeking to destroy the Jewish state. Instead, we got October 7th. Great job, Qatar. I guess we're done trusting you to keep Hamas in line. Oh, just kidding. Because since October 7th, Qatar has played a key role as a mediator in negotiations between Israel and Hamas. And they've done a stellar job of ending that conflict. Am I right? Israel and Hamas, the Saudis and the Muslim Brotherhood, the US and Iran. Qatar is sitting right in the middle of the Middle East's biggest conflicts and playing every side. And everyone knows it.
Respect. West Side.
For the US, Qatar is a strategic dilemma. Some see its influence as damaging, undermining American values and interests. Others argue that Qatar plays a strategic role in advancing US interests abroad. And in a region of bad options, a flawed partner is better than none. But for Israel, the picture is clear. Qatar is the main sponsor of Hamas's political leadership and the financial engine behind Al Jazeera's anti-Zionist narrative. Qatar isn't a superpower, it's a shadow power. One foot in Washington, one in Hamas's political headquarters. And from Qatar's perspective, these contradictions aren't hypocrisy. They're a strategy. This tiny country's survival depends on playing all sides, mediator, financier, host, and partner, without ever fully aligning with any one bloc. By keeping lines open to Islamists, Americans, Israelis, and Iranians alike, Qatar projects influence far beyond its size.